News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. And there's your closing bell for this Monday on Wall Street, where stocks got a lift from Nvidia. We'll get more on that in just a moment. We'll also bring you the closing numbers. We do it each day here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 gained 29 points. NASDAQ gained 158 points. The Dow gained 66 points. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.15%. The 2-year yield at 3.6%. And Walt Disney is bringing Jimmy Kimmel Live back to the air on Tuesday. Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri says this suspension was a cooling off period.
There were a lot of people calling into local stations, whether it's Salt Lake City or wherever, saying that his remarks were insensitive, and so Disney felt it had to act. That was Wednesday. There have been discussions at the highest level. We understand from Disney CEO Bob Iger and Dana Walden, the head of TV, directly with Jimmy Kimmel himself over, what the future would hold.
Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri. Kimmel said conservatives were trying to score political points from Kirk's death. Disney was under pressure from Brendan Carr, the Republican chairman of the FCC, who had threatened the company's broadcast licenses. And Kimmel reportedly personally negotiated his return with Disney CEO Bob Iger. Nvidia says it will invest as much as $100 billion in OpenAI to support the building of new data centers and supporting infrastructure to power AI workloads. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman tells CNBC this is critical to everything they want to do moving forward.
Without doing this, we cannot deliver the services people want. We can't keep making better models. And now that we really see what's on the near-term horizon of how good the models are getting, the new use cases that are being enabled, what people want to do, this is like the fuel that we need to drive improvement, to drive better models, to drive revenue, everything.
Nvidia says they've signed a letter of intent for a strategic deal with OpenAI, and shares of Nvidia gained about 4% in regular trading. Fed Governor Stephen Miron says interest rates are too high. He made a case for lowering them aggressively to protect the labor market. Miron argued the neutral rate of interest has fallen because of tariffs, immigration restrictions, and tax policy, and that interest rates should be lowered to prevent any damage to the economy.
I expect the second half of the year and into next year to be better in terms of growth than the first half of this year, in large part because a lot of the effects of the tax bill are going to be kicking in and trade uncertainty is dissipating. But I view a lot of that as also expanding the supply side at the same time as the demand side.
And Miron says he's come to his own conclusions without outside influence from the White House.
I've had a number of conversations with the president about the economy, about economic policy over the last 9 months. A number of those conversations have touched on the Fed also. He's never asked me to set policy in a specific way. He's never asked me. It's never happened.
Fed Governor Stephen Miron spoke to Bloomberg at the Economic Club of New York. You can hear that entire interview on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammack says they should be cautious about interest rate cuts to avoid overheating the economy.
I think that we should be very cautious in removing monetary policy restriction, because I think it's important that we stay restrictive to bring inflation back down to target. It worries me that if we remove that restriction from the economy, things could start overheating again.
Hammack told a moderated discussion at the Cleveland Fed that she remains laser-focused on inflation. And St. Louis Fed President Alberto Musalem supported last week's interest rate reduction as a way to take out insurance against a weakening labor market. He says he will support any further reductions if the labor market does get worse. The White House says doctors may be exempt from H-1B visa fees after the Trump administration announced a new $100,000 fee for H-1B visas. Medical groups warned this could worsen a doctor shortage in the U.S. and make it harder for rural hospitals to operate. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg, says President Trump's immigration policies are damaging.
The president's immigration policies combined with his tariff policies are making it harder for us to compete and driving up the costs of goods in this Commonwealth and across this country. I think what the president's doing is harming America, isolating America, and making it harder for workers here in Pennsylvania, from our farmlands to our universities.
Hear our entire interview with Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro on the Bloomberg Talks podcast. More than 150 world leaders are gathering in New York for the UN General Assembly, which kicks off tomorrow. But security is already extra tight, as we hear from Bloomberg's Miles Miller.
This United Nations General Assembly comes on the backdrop of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and so that means extra security, and they're studying that shooting to make sure that if something were to happen in Manhattan, they know how to get these 150 leaders and their spouses to where they need to get to.
Bloomberg's Miles Miller in New York. And the U.S. has all but stopped paying its bills to the U.N. since President Trump took office. The U.N. says the U.S. owes more than $3 billion. If the president keeps refusing to pay up, the U.S. could lose its vote in the U.N. General Assembly. And the Supreme Court will consider expanding President Trump's power to shape independent agencies by overturning a nearly century-old decision that limits when presidents can fire board members. The High Court has agreed now to quickly hear arguments in a case over the firing of members of the Federal Trade Commission and 2 other boards. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.